Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Mark Simon with Matt Manocherian. Hey, Matt.
Hey, what's going on, Mark?
On this episode, we're going to talk about draft philosophy. I've got a bunch of questions for Matt on that. Stephen Polacheck from the R&D Group is going to come on in a couple of minutes and talk about specifics related to teams, most notably the Jaguars and Chiefs. You can go to the sportsinfosolutions.com website for more on that. You can see all the articles in the right-hand rail of the page. And of course, go to nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. 400 scouting reports now up on potential NFL players, the draft just 2 weeks away. But first, let's talk current events. Matt, how do we unpack the reports that Tom Brady and Sean Payton were a Brian Flores lawsuit away from running the Miami Dolphins?
Yeah, this is one of the craziest stories that, it's getting some attention, but I haven't fully wrapped my head around it. I grew up a Dolphins fan. So all three of these guys are I have relationships here. Obviously, being a Dolphin fan, Tom Brady was always enemy number one. And then when I worked for the Saints, I actually lived with Sean Payton for a couple of months. So definitely some connections there. I think it's fascinating that Stephen Ross at the time we were all, I had my eyes on Harbaugh and how he was figuring out how he was going to get Harbaugh in there. I did not think the Michigan man he was going after was Brady, but it seems like that's clear from the Flores lawsuit. But the crazy thing that I just can't seem to get over is that it seems like had Flores not filed this lawsuit, Tom Brady was going to become some sort of a management position, like the GM basically of the Dolphins, and Sean Payton was going to become potentially the head coach. And then apparently the long play plan was for Brady to be both like the GM of the team and the quarterback somehow. So I can't believe all of the masterminding that went on there. And I don't know how to unpack it, to be honest with you.
Hang on. All right. Before we go, I want to move on to our other stuff, but I do have a question off of that. Do we think you specifically, since I don't know, do you think Tom Brady would be a good general manager?
That's a really fascinating question. I think he'd be, as good a general manager as like John Elway has been. I don't see why not. I think he knows the game as well as anybody. And he does seem to be better than LeBron James at bringing in the pieces of a roster that he needs to win a Super Bowl, right? He brought in Gronk and AB and got the right pieces there. He certainly picked a good team to go to in Tampa with their young defense and stuff like that. So I wouldn't put it past him. He'd figure out how to get the quarterback position right, I'm sure. And beyond that, he'd probably do what Elway did and let other people worry about the actual, hard parts of team building.
All right, on to the topics of the show and staying with quarterbacks. We're going to talk here because it's an easy starting point. We don't necessarily rank guys based on team needs when we're doing our draft board. It's a horizontal board, as Matt likes to say. But some teams have needs that others don't. For example, we're not necessarily talking top tier quarterbacks when it comes to the Chargers or Bengals. So Matt, just kind of explain philosophy, I guess. So let's start there.
Well, if I was going to be obnoxious, I'd say, why not? Why can't the Chargers or Bengals pick a quarterback high in the draft?
Well, wait, if they had like the 10th pick, the 8th pick, you would say take Malik Willis or...
I'm just saying I don't necessarily know why not, right? If you want a cost control backup, if you want the ability to potentially develop talent and then you can actually sell that talent for more than what you got it for. A couple names that come to mind, Jimmy Garoppolo. The Patriots drafted him thinking that he was going to be a succession plan to Tom Brady, ended up trading him for, I think, more capital than what he cost them. More recently, I mean, there was Rodgers and drafting Jordan Love there. And that one's like really weird because Rodgers won 2 MVPs since then. Obviously, Jordan Love hasn't played much of a role in their success there. But at the same time, if they tried to trade him, they might be able to get something for him. If Rodgers got injured, they might actually have a competent guy there. I think that getting talented players and valuable assets as quarterbacks can be, if you really believe that a quarterback is the best player on the board, all I'm saying is, which I don't think is ever going to be the case with any quarterback this year, but I just wouldn't rule out drafting a quarterback or any position just because of that. So that's my obnoxious answer. And, I think your retort might be like, wouldn't you piss off Burrow or something like that, just like you pissed off Rodgers? And and you also don't have enough practice snap reps to go around. If you have multiple young quarterbacks, that's something that's a real problem. You only have so many snaps in practice that you can devote to developing players. So there's real stuff there that goes on. So it's not that I'm saying that we shouldn't think about fit at all. I just don't like need-based drafting, because at the end of the day, you're trying to acquire, good pieces that make up a football team, and the right pieces. So the way that our board works is, and when you say the horizontal board, in case anybody's wondering, it's that it puts players into tiers, right? So it's not meant to be 1 through 100. It's not meant to be, this is our top ranked guy, this is our second ranked guy, this is our third ranked guy. They're supposed to be put into tiers based on how valuable they are to your team. And then by seeing the players in those tiers, it allows the teams the freedom to create a strategy that allows them to get the best possible players who fit what they're trying to do. So it's always best player available over need-based drafting, but it doesn't mean that fit isn't important. The board itself allows you to choose the best players who fit, which I think is a key distinction that's maybe not obvious to people that aren't familiar with the grading scale.
I'm certainly a little easier to explain visually rather than than audio, but you can certainly go to NFLDraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. Plenty more where that came from. Also, sportsinfosolutions.com for articles. We're going to talk about Steve Polacheck in a second. So with these top end quarterbacks, I've been wondering, where's the fit? You hear that some guys are projects, developmental, others might be more NFL ready. What team is the ideal fit for Malik Willis?
Yeah, well, Willis definitely fits into that developmental, not NFL ready sort of range. And I wouldn't take him at the sort of number 8 where they'll be drafting, and it might require taking this sort of player. But I think Atlanta would be a really interesting fit. You got a boomer bust prospect for a team that's in a rebuilding mode already. You look at their head coach, Arthur Smith, offensive guy who's done it with a limited quarterback before, which I would consider Ryan Tannehill to be a limited quarterback. Obviously, he didn't get him as a rookie the way you're getting in Malik Willis here. But I think that in terms of being able to put him in a position to succeed and develop the team around him, I kind of like that fit with Arthur Smith there. And then I like the fun factor of this one. I think it'd be fun for 2 reasons. Number 1, Malik Willis and Kyle Pitts would be really fun. Number 2, Malik Willis would give me some Michael Vick Madden nostalgia from back in the day of when you had the most unstoppable player in Madden history. The Bo Jackson of Tecmo Super Bowl was Michael Vick in early 2000s Madden. So yeah.
Matt, have you ever seen a situation where, okay, the Falcons wouldn't take him at 8. Let's say the Falcons traded down to like 15, thinking that they could get him, and then someone snuck in and took him at 13, and now they're at 15, and maybe they're. This is, I guess, an argument for not drafting for need. That if you're going to slip back, you're not slipping back because you had one guy in mind. You're slipping back because you had a tier of players in mind, right?
Exactly. So you want to think about the cloud of players that's going to be available on that tier that you're looking at when you pick. And if you think that you can stay on the same tier of players while moving down, then I think that it's usually a good move. Usually you're counting the number of picks and the number of players that you want to make sure that you're going to have somebody that you're comfortable with at that spot. So if you do move down, it's not we're moving down to take him at 15. It's we're moving down. And if he's there at 15, we feel good about taking him there. But we also feel good about taking these other 8 guys there too.
All right. What about Kenny Pickett?
Kenny Pickett, interesting because he's more of the sort of ready-made NFL starter with more limited upside, I would say, when you really dive into his tape. I'd like to see him go to a team that's built more around a defensive identity, where they're looking maybe for more of a game manager type than a win because of type quarterback, where you really need that guy that can hit the home run out of the park for you. So a couple teams that I think like to play like that historically. Seattle, obviously moving on from Russell Wilson. I think Pete Carroll would love to get back to a defensive identity for this team, a run the ball identity, and a quarterback who can come in and do just enough to get them over the hump. So that would be an interesting spot for Pickett because I think it wouldn't be asking too much of him. Pittsburgh would be interesting too because they've been so good defensively for a few years now. They've really struggled at that quarterback position. Getting somebody right in there that could come in, and I think he would have some comfort there in Pittsburgh. That would be a very interesting landing spot.
We're joined now by R&D associate Stephen Polacheck, who has spearheaded some writing for us that is appearing on the Sports Info Solution website in conjunction with what we're doing on the NFL draft site. Stephen, welcome. I think the first thing that we want to touch on is the whole Travon Walker rise and fall on the draft board. How do you feel about that?
Well, I can speak confidently as a Jacksonville Jaguars fan who's been looking at this number 1 pick pretty much under a microscope and trying to figure out what I would do. really this Travon Walker was never even in consideration for me up until the rumblings of he might be going number 1. And frankly, I pretty strongly disagree with it. Really just comes at a huge surprise at how a guy who, to our ratings, is not even in the top 10 of any of our leaderboard stats that we have on our site, outside of just total points rating per run. Now that's about 12 different statistics that he's not even in the top 20 in, and that's just among edge rushers. Now he tested really well at the combine. I get that, but I'm very confused that when you have a franchise altering pick at number 1 overall, you're going to take the guy who didn't produce in college. It just doesn't make sense to me. Not when there's guys like Kayvon Thibodeaux and Aidan Hutchinson who have both tested really well and come with all the production on the field.
Yeah, you make me think of a couple things there. First of all, it's like, okay, why do guys rise and fall? And it's like, that's how they got you. You said it yourself. You were like, I wasn't thinking about him there until there was buzz for him. And then I started thinking about him there. And that's, I guess, like how the agents play their game and how the whole media cycle plays into it. And obviously he had a great combine, but that kind of brings me to the second thing that I thought about. You've been doing some research in looking at athleticism and production and sort of which teams are drafting and so far it seems that it's like kind of inconclusive of like, should you draft for athleticism or should you draft for production? I don't know. You can tell me if that's accurate or not. But he's clearly not the production guy. Like you said, he's on the lower end of most of the leaderboards that you can see on NFLdraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. The positives, you look at a low injury risk, you look at his ridiculous frame, you look at somebody with positional versatility. But for a guy that grades out, he grades out as our 3rd ranked edge rusher. He grades out as our 13th ranked player overall with a 6.8 grade. That's a good starting grade. We see him becoming a plus starter in the NFL by his 2nd season, but we don't see Aidan Hutchinson, to your point. The upside's outrageous with this guy. I guess we'll give credit where credit's due, but I'm with you. Even in a lackluster draft, like, seems to me like that would be a recipe for weirdness. Remember when the Cavaliers got the number 1 pick and they drafted the guy, Anthony Bennett? Was that his name?
Mm-hmm.
It would feel a little bit like Anthony Bennett.
Yeah, when there's just you have the luxury at number 1 to take, and you get your entire choosing of this class, and this is the guy that now the Jags don't have a 2nd first-round pick this year. So like, this is their way of getting better. This is their star. This is going to bring fans in. This is supposed to sell jerseys. And to take the guy who tested well at the combine and nobody really knows his name, I believe the Vegas odds didn't even have him they didn't even list him as potential 1st overall pick. And they had like 20 some players on their list about a month ago. Like, Travon Walker is not
how much could you have
name.
learned about him? How much could you have learned about him?
Right.
In the last month? Yeah.
Right. And there's something to be said of, okay, maybe this guy is really good and maybe he is worthy of going in the 1st round. And we just didn't know about it as fans. But seriously, when there's other options that are as good or better in most aspects of the game, I don't know how you look the other way besides it's, dare I say, prospect fatigue. So are we tired of talking about Hutchinson?
It definitely reminds me of Baker Mayfield a few years ago. I think that's the closest comparison I could think of, like somebody coming really out of nowhere to get into the number 1 pick conversation. Even that was way earlier though. And like it was like going from preseason to the end of the season. He sort of made that, I don't know, if he didn't made the leap into the number 1 pick conversation until later on, but it was sort of surprising. I guess the jury's kind of still, I guess it didn't work technically if they're moving on from him.
Matt, isn't it though just like one of these things where it's chatter? I think
so.
I think like in
noise.
a week,
I think it's
cooler
noise,
heads will prevail. They'll all get together. They'll all figure it out, and they'll say, "Wait a second! Like this is just something that I don't want, not necessarily fatigue, but just kind of like, hey, there's a couple of weeks left here. There's clear-cut guys. Let's throw another guy in the mix."
So I think the reason why Stephen is so curious about it is because like there's some level of signal inside the noise that is people moving up and down draft boards, but like it's much more noise than signal. I think is what it comes down to. Like, it is mostly just chatter, like what you're saying. But what's weird is sometimes that chatter happens around legitimate things that are learned about players, where you learn about injury history, you learn about personal character, you get a chance to interview them, and somebody blows you away because of the way that they can talk about football. These sorts of things are not meaningless. They're just not nearly as meaningful as all of the up and down.
The news is always in the pick. The news is never in the EKG that precedes the draft in the preceding couple of weeks. Sorry, I had to say that.
Yeah, no, it drives scouts crazy. So I'm there.
All right, let's actually segue here to the Jags. Stephen. So Stephen's written a series of articles, as I mentioned, for the company website. Other people have done them too, focusing on specific teams, team needs, looking at essentially the first 100-ish picks of the draft, looking to see what slots where, what makes sense for what team. I know Matt likes to just draft on kind of like best player, but we're going to talk need a little bit here. Stephen, let's start with the Jags. First, 33rd, 65th, and 70th. Let's start with number one and just kind of get to who you think is the best fit for that spot.
So within the articles, I break down a couple players at each pick of these are guys they should be considering. They're commonly mocked in that area. The noises, they'll maybe be available at that time. Obviously, the NFL draft is a wildly unpredictable thing where projecting pick 65 and 70, there's 65 picks that go before them. But with that being said, so number one is pretty easy. It's the same kind of candidates. Aidan Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeaux, the edge rushers. There, we just talked about Travon Walker. I didn't write about him, and Evan Neal, the offensive tackle from Alabama.
I like that choice. I like that strong choice. Not even writing about him. Let him know how you feel.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've made it pretty clear. I've said it on this podcast a couple episodes ago that I'm not swaying away from those three. I'm picking one of those three. That's what I'm doing. I'm happy with any of them. I have my own preference of Thibodeaux, but really, I think at number one, you're looking for best player available. All three of those guys just come with, they're just blue chip prospects you build your team around. Those are the guys you long for when you come into the first round of a draft. So there's noise a little bit. It actually came out today that Matt Lombardo is saying Doug Peterson is really advocating that they actually go offense with the first pick and draft one of the tackles instead. But there's a need for another edge rusher opposite of Josh Allen, their first round pick of a couple of years ago, who has done very well, but he's the only one there that's drawing attention. And naturally, two edge rushers that require attention, they make the other ones better. We see that all the time, that when you get extra guys on the front of a defense, they all, what do you want to say? A rising tide lifts all boats. Right. They're all better. So as we move into,
we also say matchups get better.
Right. So as you move later into the draft, I still think the main goal should be best player available, but I'm in the boat of, I think there's not enough there in terms of receiving weapons. So at 33, there's probably going to be some sprinkle of some wide receivers, two of which I'm big fans of. And it's not a homer pick, but Jahan Dotson being one of them, just a versatile weapon that can win anywhere, come with sure hands. Sure hands is something the Jaguars really lacked last year. There were a lot of drops.
I see you say Jahan Dotson wearing your Penn State shirt and claiming to not be a homer.
I mean, I think it's part of it. And I've been a very big Jaquan Brisker fan. I think part of it is I've watched every single game that they've played in through school, and I see the value that they bring to the team. And I'm a big proponent of that's going to translate. So maybe it's not necessarily homer bias of being a fan, but very confident in my stance on them.
So I want to go back to, you said Thibodeaux would be your guy if you had your druthers there, number one. That disagrees with NFLDraft.sportsinfosolutions.com, where we have Aidan Hutchinson as our number one overall player. And we have him just edging out Thibodeaux by one grade range. You know, we have that blue chip range versus that ideal starter range. So, I mean, we're talking about great players, and the stats are really similar for both of these guys. They crush a lot of the leaderboards, both of them. What is it about Thibodeaux that you prefer about him for the Jaguars to Hutchinson specifically?
I think all through their collegiate careers, both have been really good, but I don't want to fall victim to the recency bias of Hutchinson's gigantic games that happened at the end of the year. That I believe he had 3 sacks against Ohio State in national television looking for a playoff spot. Yes, that was a great game. And I do believe Hutchinson is worthy of a first overall pick, but for his entire career, Thibodeaux has been the guy. Scouts came to watch Sewell and Herbert at Oregon, and the Oregon coaches said, actually, make sure you pay attention to this kid. Like, he has been the best player all through this process. Everybody, I don't want to say everybody. If you look at most mocks back in, I want to say the early fall before the season got going, Thibodeaux was number 1 in most of them. Whoever was going to be there, it was going to be Thibodeaux. And now, I don't want to take away from Hutchinson's season because those, I don't want to call them one-shot wonders, but those guys who have that really awesome final year, I don't want to overcompensate for that. And I'm taking I believe, just the better athlete, better prospect, higher ceiling, maybe better prospect's not the right word, higher ceiling that Thibodeaux brings just from him forever being the dominant player that we all labeled him to be. And the fact that Oregon didn't have the best season and didn't get onto the national stage in front of everybody's eyes, I don't want that to hurt him. And that's where I'm taking him over Hutchinson.
Yep. I'll agree and disagree on certain things. 2020 was a weird year. Neither of them really, nobody had a real season that year. But 2019, they were both very productive. Hutchinson was really productive in 2019, just as was Thibodeaux. To your point, the athletic upside, I think definitely points for Thibodeaux. Certainly when you look at it from an age standpoint, that would be true in terms of if you believe the younger players have more kind of meat on the bone in terms of upside there. So I think what you're saying is reasonable. I think it's close. I think different flavors of things, but I still side with our scouts there on that one. So nice little first take disagreement for here. For
and that's totally valid. And if that's the decision the Jaguars come to, as a fan, I'm fine with it. So,
and that's why you'd love a trade down. You'd love a trade down and give me one of them and other picks, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Trading down is pretty much always the way to do it.
You mentioned receivers with the Jags. Let's segue to the Chiefs and talk receivers, because I know you have that as a potential priority for them. 29 and 30 makes sense, of course. Tyreek Hill gone. 5 picks in the top 103, 4 in the top 62. You read about the Chiefs. What are some of the players to consider, particularly at that 29-30 spot?
So it's funny. I did put Dotson down for them as well. I think he's going to go right at that end of first round, beginning of the second round, just based on the way that like we talked about, the chatter that's happening around the league. It sounds as if many of the big name candidates, such as Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, they're going to be gone by the time the Chiefs come up at 29 and 30. So I listed Dotson. I think like I said, his short hands and dynamic after the catch ability is something that the Chiefs really can prioritize. I think he becomes a star in that offense. Another name that has gotten a lot of noise.
Do you worry about size for Dotson?
I think my answer is no. Is he undersized? Sure, I don't disagree, but I don't think that means he can't be a great wide receiver. There's great wide receivers all over the field that are small.
Yeah, I know our scout who was the primary on him felt like he didn't play small. He was never concerned about that element of his game. Yeah, it's there. He's not going to be your 6'4" receiver, but it doesn't really limit what he can do on the field. So that's fair there.
And it's not as if he hasn't made incredible highlight catches, winning jump balls. There's 2 from the 2020 season against Ohio State that show up in every video you watch of him. So, like, exactly what I said, not concerned. Now, if you're looking for in the article, I made a joke that he was voted most likely to be the next Tyreek Hill of this draft class, but Sky Moore from Western Michigan is pretty much as good of a plug and play Tyreek Hill replacement as you can find. I mean, he's lightning fast. He does a lot of the same things, just making guys miss in the next level, getting deep. Now he's a small school guy. There's been a debate of, is the Chiefs offense sustainable? Can they keep playing with that undersized wide receiver like Tyreek Hill was? I don't want to say why they got beat, but ultimately teams figured out how to play them better. I don't want to say figured them out, but figured out how to play them better. So if they're looking for just a plug and play spot right at 30, Sky Moore from Western Michigan is a name that now we're lower on at SIS, but has gotten a lot of noise in that range.
I wouldn't say that we're super, low on him as a player. He's definitely a gap between him and the receivers that are above him on the board, but he's a little bit of a victim of our grading scale, where we really see him as a player that is specifically a number 3 because of the lack of versatility to go inside and outside. I think that he's a slot. I think that he's a slot through and through. And if you value a slot like that, then you can draft him there and he can be a really explosive player. He's a little bit of a victim of the grading scale, where we saw Kadarius Toney with the same grade go in the late first round last year. If you really value that skill set, if there's a role for it, you just have to know what you're getting. Our board doesn't value that as highly. Going back to like the Chiefs, just from a big picture, Valdez-Scantling, really interesting. Somebody they brought in, Smith-Schuster from the Steelers, he came over. So you have probably a slottish guy in Juju. You have a big speedster in MVS and see, never really panned out there, but he got paid well enough to come in there. And then Mecole Hardman too, who I think is like the most Tyreek Hill-ish when you talk about small, fast dudes. But he's always been like not quite Tyreek Hill to this point in his career. So it'll be really interesting to see how they fill in. I also would be curious to see if they go at some of the depth of the edge and the corner class. There'll be some starting caliber players that can play edge and play corner. And I know for Steve Spagnuolo, he's never going to have too many versatile defensive linemen or dudes that can cover.
What's very interesting with the Chiefs is if you look at their metrics from last year, they were pretty much number 1 in offensive efficiency in all the different metrics that we're looking at. They were the best, and their defense was down in the 20s. It sucked to put it lightly, but there's obviously the variable of they no longer have their leading receiver. So their efficiency will naturally dip, but it comes down to a philosophical question of how do we get back to the conference championship game? How do we get back to the Super Bowl? Is it by keeping up the elite offense and trying it again with different personnel? Or is it, do we try and fill out a well-rounded team? Do we address the holes at defense that we have? And not that there's any glaring holes, but when you're 24th-ish in efficiency, tells you you're not a Super Bowl defense. So I think the back-to-back, I would bet on them going 1-1 in each, a receiver and then the best defensive player they can get their hands on. And I don't want to make a guess, but they come with the most ammo in this top 100. I would not be surprised to see them jump around the board. If there's a team that's going to move up, not necessarily jump way up, but if they're a team to jump up 5 picks, all of a sudden to snag a guy who's falling, I think the Chiefs are the team that are most likely to do that with just the amount of assets that they can move around, whether it be a 5-pick upgrade in the first to drop 20 later on, stuff like that, trades like that.
Yeah, I'd love to see them be patient, sit there right at 29 and 30 and get a starting level player. When you talk about combination receiver, edge, corner, I think there'll be tons of players there that can fill those positions for them. Sit around, take some awesome players. I do think you're right. They do seem like likely to move up, just like they took a running back in the first round a couple of years ago, and maybe against my better judgment. But, they won 12 games last year. They actually underperformed their win expectation based on SIS WAR. We had them at 13.8 wins. So this is a team that's definitely in win now mode. So to your point, where they might just be looking to fill in those last remaining pieces, I think that you're right. Will be interesting to see. I think it depends a little bit how they fill out the rest of their talent, where they end up playing with Chris Jones for the majority of the year next year. I think they experiment with him outside. He ended up coming inside more often than not towards the end of the year. I wonder what Spags has in store there, because I think there's a multi-year developmental plan. when you talk about the way that he tries to organize his things. Ultimately, they had the injuries at corner that really cost them against the Bills. That was, they had great corner play all year, but I still think it's why you can never have too many guys there.
Yep. And with multiple picks in the second and third round, and with good corners out there, that's a perfect spot to just grab a high upside athletic guy. Maybe he's a future star of the league, but at minimum, you have a guy who you can put out there confidently in a crucial situation and not worry that he's going to get outrun by the elite speedsters.
So from a team with a boatload of picks early on to a team with basically the one other team that you wrote about, just to show the depth of what we're trying to do on the website with the draft website. We're going through every team, and we're even looking at a team like the Raiders, who have one pick in the 80s in the top 100. Give us a breakdown on where they could go.
So the Raiders are a very interesting spot because they got stuck in I don't want to call it the mediocrity zone, but no man's land. They're a good, not great team, but while they still have enough talent on the team, they will never be picking up towards the top. Now, just now we learned that they gave an extension to quarterback Derek Carr. So they're committed to try and keep up this run of success that they've had in recent years. They made it to the playoffs. We're very close against the Bengals, just a possession away from winning that game. But with new head coach Josh McDaniels, they're trying to step up to the next level. And coming into this draft, top of the list, what do the Raiders need, was going to be wide receiver. So what did they do? They decided, we don't even care about trying to draft one. We'll just give our first and second away, and we'll just take Davante Adams. So in theory, you could say they drafted Davante Adams with those two picks, but that leaves them with a roster that was just good enough to get into the playoffs and throw some punches against the Bengals. So they still have holes. They have to get better. But as a team that's trying to win now, they have to find guys who can step in immediately. So a couple names that I bring up, Dylan Parham, he's a center from Memphis. He's a 4-year starter with good football intelligence, guy who could you can plug him in and just let him start playing, and he should be picking it up fast because he has seen it a lot. Cole Strange, a guard from Chattanooga, very similar. He spent 6 years at school. He's well-versed in playing guard. Just the experience really matters, and you can't
plug and play. Yep.
Right. You can't replicate in-game reps. You can practice, but in-game reps matter. And the Raiders can take guys in this range that have those reps, can just be put in immediately and be dependable. Now, odds are they're not going to be superstars, all pro guys, but when you're talking taking a spot where you were bleeding to a spot that you can hold your own, that's a huge step. And that's what you can get further in the playoffs with that, by not having those giant liabilities.
Yeah, I definitely see, looking at the depth chart, they're well stocked offensively, kind of at the skill positions, could use some more help on the offensive line. And then defensive line, the edge rush tandem looks good with Chandler Jones and Max Crosby there. But then again, some more holes on the back end. They're if you remember how bad their defense was just 2 years ago, I think they kind of came a long way. They need to continue to build on that side of the ball. Hopefully won't be too disrupted from where they were in the past. They did already add Anthony Averett and Rock Ya-Sin at corner. So interesting.
Yeah, and they have drafted well in the later rounds in finding playable defenders. Not, like I said, not anybody who's absolutely changing the franchise, but playable defenders. It's a huge improvement from where they were.
Yeah, Calvin and Nate Hobbs definitely has performed well for them. So I definitely agree with you there.
All right, Stephen Polacheck, thank you for taking the time to join us. We got lots more articles to come on the website. We got articles from other writers besides him. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
And this wraps up this week's edition of Off the Charts. Thank you for tuning in. You can listen to our other podcast, Playing in Space, which covers the NBA with Henry Ward. Our baseball podcast, the Sports Info Solutions Baseball Podcast, on which we bring in major league guest Ken Rosenthal on the last one. And you can visit the Sports Info Solutions family website, sportsinfosolutions.com. I've got all our articles there that cover the NFL draft. You can read Steve's team needs pieces and some of the other people who have written for us on that subject as well. And of course, nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. 400 scouting reports, analytics, leaderboards, injury information, so much more. Your perfect guide to the upcoming NFL draft. For Matt Manocherian and Stephen Polacheck, I'm Mark Simon. Thank you for listening to Off the Charts.